Welcome back, it's Des. Today I will be conducting a philosophical argument analysis on one of the most interesting thought experiments in contemporary ethics, questioning whether it would be morally permissible to travel back in time and kill Adolf Hitler as a child. Ethics is a branch of philosophy concerned with moral principle, exploring what is right and wrong, good and bad, and how people should act in society. It examines the value, duties, justice, and human behavior in decision making. This thought experiment is not merely a hypothetical curiosity, it cuts to the very heart of a long-standing, deep contested philosophical argument that the ends justify the means. This principle associated mostly famously with the Italian political philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli, later developed through utilitarian moral philosophy by Julian Berlin and John Sterling Mill, holds that an action may be morally justified if the outcomes are significantly good. I will proceed by first placing the argument in a strict logical form and constructing the truth of each premises, identifying logical fallacies, errors in reasoning, and finally reaching a justified conclusion. The core argument, charity reconstruct, runs as follows. Premises 1. If an action precedes the greatest overall reduction in human suffering, then it is morally justified. Premise 2. Traveling back in time and killing Adolf Hitler as a child would produce the greatest overall reduction in human suffering, preventing the Holocaust and the Second World War. Conclusion. Therefore, traveling back in time and killing Adolf Hitler as a child is morally justified. This is a valid deductive argument. If both premises are true, the conclusion necessarily follows. The critical philosophical question then is not whether the logic holds, it's whether each premise is empirically or analytically justified. This one reflects the central claim of act of utilitarianism, mostly systematically articulated by John Sterling Mill in his 1863 work, Utilitarianism. Mills argues that morally correct action is always the one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number, with the least overall suffering. Utilitarianism is importantly a theory about acting under the best circumstances. It tells us what is justified when certain conditions are met. So the real question is, under what circumstances would premises 1 actually hold? If we conceive of time travel as a real possibility, we are by extension conceiving of a world in which we can know the outcome of events in advance. Under the condition where the outcome is known with certainty and the outcome is significantly reduced in suffering, premises 1 is articulately justified under utilitarian principles. Killing baby Hitler on these terms would be morally justified. However, this is precisely where the critique must land. Utilitarian principles of this kind do not exist in this reality, because we cannot empirically know the future. The philosopher Immanuel Kant, in his groundwork of the metaphysics of morals, raised a fundamental objection in consequently reasoning on exactly this ground, that human beings are not capable of foreseeing the consequences of their action, and therefore ethical frameworks built solely on prediction outcome is not empirically justified. Furthermore, premises 1 raises the problem of moral precision. If suffering reduction alone justifies for any action, including the killing of an innocent child, then we have effectively licensed to an unlimited range of violent acts, provided a significantly large benefit can be imagined. This is a slippery slope fallacy. The implicant assumes that once accepted, this principle can precisely be contained. This too is perhaps the most philosophical vulnerable complaint of this argument. It asserts as though it were a straightforward fact that killing Hitler would prevent the Holocaust and the Second World War. To state with certainty that would have happened under different circumstances is to commit a fallacy of hypothesis contrary to fact, treating the unprovocable counterfactual as established truth. Historians and philosophers of history have long debated the question of historical contingency. The historian Ian Kashir is biographical study Hitler argues that while Hitler was uniquely and instrumental in radicalizing Nazi ideology, the structural condition that gave rise to the Holocaust, including the virtual anti-Semitism, economy collapse following the First World War, the failure of the Weimar Republic were already deeply embedded in Germany and European society. Rise to what philosophers called the problem of alternative causation. It is entirely plausible that in the absence of Hitler, another figure would emerge to exploit the same structural conditions. Premises 2, therefore, is empirically justified. It dresses up a speculatively casual claim as certainty. Moreover, premises 2 commits what is known as a fallacy of the single cause, the assumption that one individual was the necessary and significant cause of the emergent historical catastrophe. Complex historical events are multi-causal, and to reduce Holocaust to an extent of one person is both historically inaccurate and logically fallacious. Beyond the weakness in each individual premises, the argument as the whole contains several further errors in reasoning worth identifying. First, there is the problem of moral status of convocation. The argument implicitly treats a child morally innocent being who has committed no wrong as equivalent to a moral status to the adult predator of the genocide. This is a form of equivocation. The word Hitler slides between referring to an innocent child and the adult dictator. Confronting two morally distinct persons, Kant argues that rational human beings must be treated as ends in themselves, never merely as means. To kill a child for what might become is to treat him purely as means to an end, a direct violation of his principle. Second, the argument contains a false dilemma. It empirically assumes that killing Hitler as a child is the only available means to prevent the Holocaust. Yet, even within the logic of this thought experiment, alternative options exist, such as preventing Hitler's political rise, intervening at a key historic moment, or addressing the structural condition that enables narcissism. The frame of this argument articulately narrows the more moral option available. Third, there is a disconnected premises lurking within the argument. The conclusion speaks of a moral justification, but premises 1 speaks only of suffering reduction. These are not articulately equivalent. An action can reduce suffering without being morally justified. For instance, a torture-based medical experiment might, in theory, reduce suffering but would still widely condemned as morally impermissible. The argument argues without justification and that suffering reduction is both necessary and significant for moral justification. The thought experiment of killing baby Hitler is philosophically vulnerable precisely because it forces us to confront the limits of the consequential moral reasoning. The argument is, as established, a valid deductive argument, and under strict utilitarian principle, if the outcome can be known with certainty, then the outcome increases the overall happiness. The killing of baby Hitler would be justified. This is the conclusion under utilitarianism itself commits to. However, this analysis reveals that the premises required to reach that conclusion are not empirically justified in the real world. We cannot know the future with certainty, utilitarianism demands, and there is no reliable evidence that removing one individual would prevent the catastrophe rooted in deep structure and ideological condition. Premises 2 fails the test of empirical justification, resting instead on an unprovoked hypothesis central to fact. More troublingly, as consent objection makes clear, accepting that a significant good produces outcome can justify any action, including killing of an innocent child, places us on a slippery slope where virtue of any atrocity could be justified to appeal to a greater good. This is the real danger of the thought experiment exposed. Ethics then requires us to ask not merely what outcomes we seek, but what kind of moral agents we choose to be in pursuing them. As Kant reminds us, as the thought experiment is so vividly illustrated, utilitarianism justification cannot be separated from the empirical certainty it requires, certainty we cannot possess. Thank you.